Hi, I'm Stephen Feinberg, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Film and TV Office. Tonight we have some special guests. They write, direct, produce, they even work here at Rhode Island PBS, and on top of that, they're Emmy Award winners and they're married to one another. I want to welcome both Maria and Scott Saracen to the table here at Double Feature. Welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
It's a pleasure
Now,
to be
you
here.
guys have been friends for several years.
Yes.
I've admired your work. You both work here at Rhode Island PBS, so we want to let the audience know that. But you also worked on this three-part fantastic documentary that I really want to try to focus in on. It's called Chasing Silver, is a story of Gorham, a manufacturer of silver here in Rhode Island. And you did a three-part series. What was it, 90? How long was the 3 hours?
Yep,
It was
3
3 hours total, yeah?
3 hours.
Yep.
Please share with us how that whole adventure gets started.
Well, we have RISD Museum to thank for it because they were putting on an amazing exhibit in 2019. And our president, David Picciarelli, heard about it. He got in touch with them, and then that's when things took off and we partnered with them. And at first, we really knew nothing about Gorham, and our only reference was my grandmother's gifts that she used to give us, which was all the Gorham crystal. And so we were a little puzzled as to what this series was going to be about. But once we got the presentation from RISD Museum and Elizabeth Williams, who was spearheading the exhibit there, we got really excited about the history that is just so rich and grounded in Rhode Island.
I went to that exhibit, which was very beautiful. And I'm like you. I think our generation, we didn't embrace silver and all of this other stuff, where our parents, it was an institution, right?
Absolutely,
Huge, yeah.
yeah.
It was everybody's grandmother had a Gorham silver set in their, in their dining room, and it really was a staple. But to go to the exhibit and see some of the craftsmanship that happened throughout the 19th century and early 20th century, they just put so much detail into these pieces of silver.
If you've never thought about silver before or cared about it, just to go to that exhibition was just awe-inspiring.
You started this in 2018.
Well, it was a twinkle in our eye in 2018.
We were actually on the beach in Greece when we got the notification, when you get back to Rhode Island, we need to have a meeting about a documentary that we want to have you guys do. So
Yeah.
And then when did it finally air?
In May of 2021, and we really started working on it in earnest, I would say the end of 2019, we had this massive interview session with a lot of people. We did not predict the pandemic, but when the pandemic hit, luckily we had all of those interviews in the can so we could continue to work on it.
Did you, I found that when I was doing a documentary on Senator Pell and the Pell Grants, and I didn't know what my drama was going to be. And at one point I interviewed a gentleman my very first day of filming, and I said, tell me a secret, tell me something I don't know. And suddenly he spilled out this whole thing, and it provided the drama, the spine of the whole documentary. Did you guys find that you discovered the dramas as you started to investigate more and more? Or how did that come about?
So we were very lucky that two vital books that we used as our Bibles were out there about the history of Gorham, and they covered certain periods. And the latest being Elizabeth Williams in the RISD Museum, they put out the latest book. One of the big things, though, was there was also John Gorham's his diary from his trip to England that had some real insights and some personal stories that, him getting sick on the boat and different things that we could add to bring in
Human character.
Human character.
yeah.
And it was essentially at the very beginning the story about a father and a son, and how there obviously was great love between them and they were working together, but at a certain point the son was trying to be very progressive and doing these things that the father was a little bit nervous about because it was new technology. So there was that kind of drama and dynamic. And it really, I think, sustained through the entire series. There were definitely there was definitely
there was
conflict.
always challenges going on.
Yes.
And sometimes it was internal, but sometimes it was external.
Yeah.
You know what? This is probably a great time. Let's share a little clip for the audience so they can see. We're just going to give them a taste of Chasing Silver, and then hopefully in the next coming weeks or so, we can show, maybe the 2 or 3 parts of the entire documentary. So let's go to a clip of Chasing Silver by Scott and Maria Saracen.
There is perhaps no better way to define the Gilded Age than to take a stroll down Bellevue Avenue in Newport, Rhode Island. Dotted with summer cottages of the elite, the avenue flaunts the excesses of the economic boom following the Civil War. Railroads, factories, and coal mines catapulted families such as the Vanderbilts and Astors into obscene wealth and opulent living.
The people who are occupying those summer cottages need to have wares that match this architecture. And so what better place to go to than Gorham for the silver that would be there at their summer cottage, and as well as in their other residence in New York City, let's say.
The Victorians just did not want empty space on their table, so Gorham felt that they could certainly provide for that need. And it became a way of discerning class. Like, if you didn't know how to use all these pieces, you didn't belong at this dinner table. It met a need for the wealthy. It was a distraction. It was a show-off. It was class distinction. In fact, you could have eaten with your fingers. But it was Victorian. So what can we say about the Victorians?
Well, I'm glad we get to show that to the audience. Let me ask you this. What were some of the greater challenges you had making this documentary?
So look, I mean, anyone making a film, you always run up against challenges, and we're definitely used to that. But I think what everybody experienced in 2020 with COVID and the pandemic and having to just shut the world down, I would say that was a huge challenge for us because basically the good part of it was that being a husband and wife team, we get to work together, so we worked from home. The challenge was we were shut off from the outside world. We still had a number of scenes to shoot, so that closed down for a number of months. And then we also have an 8-year-old who at the time was 6, and he had to homeschool for kindergarten and have the Zoom calls and everything that everybody was doing. So I think that, there was definitely some real challenges with COVID and accessibility.
Did you know it was going to be in 3 parts when you started out? Or what?
Good question. I mean, there was a lot of debate back and forth of how much to do. We went from as little as 1 hour to as many as possibly 10 hours. Because this is, I mean, we're talking about the company itself spans almost 200 years of history. And then we even start before that in the colonial period with Paul Revere, who was a silversmith. So there was that thought. But we, going through the books, the research, and really talking about it, we decided just 3 hours was a great way to break up, in time periods, how we wanted to tell the story.
Right.
And also tell it in a very interesting way, because if you drag it out, there's certainly many different directions we could have gone in, but we thought it was a compelling 3 hours.
Well, were there certain parts that you really, and you might have different viewpoints, were there certain parts you said, this is like my favorite part?
I have no problem picking favorites. I don't know about you. I really enjoyed the John and Jabez story in the beginning, the first episode. But the challenge with that is there's no one to tell us first person what happened and, to really make the stories rich. Who we did interview were great storytellers. But what I loved about the third episode was that people could tell their personal stories. So I really enjoyed that. I also enjoyed the different perspective in the third episode where we actually talk about some of the environmental repercussions of having this company that is revered, but at the same time, there's also like an unpolished or a tarnished part of the history.
pollution.
You know, yeah. And there are people who are, you know, scholars and talking about that. And so I like that we included that too. I think it gives the whole picture.
That's the beauty in some of the warts of
Exactly.
and not everybody knew at that time what they were, you know, what they were doing. They were just trying
Exactly.
to build a business
Exactly, yeah. And
employ a lot of different people.
yes, absolutely.
What about you, Scott? Did you have any favorite moments?
Favorite? So I agree with Maria. There were some very rich stories in the third episode, especially they get into the union strikes. That was a very contentious period of time. But personally, just I love the historical things, and I think John Gorham was my favorite, my hero. Just watching his journey, and to have the journey from him to go to England to find the steam press, and to have that all recounted in his diary, that's what I dug into.
And did
the
you guys
most.
actually get to hold the diary?
No.
Oh.
No, that I believe is at the Hay
Hay
Library because they have all the Gorham archives. It's amazing that they accepted them and they have them. But we got like copies, so
Yeah.
we could read it. You know, it wasn't typed up or anything. We could actually see his handwriting,
handwriting.
but it wasn't the original.
And we'd be remiss to not mention that, you know, when we were given this, like Maria said, on a silver platter, between RISD Museum and the Brown Hay Library, there was so much of the archives that have been saved and researched and, you know, very meticulously.
Yeah.
So we had access to a digital archive of just thousands and thousands of photographs and
Catalogs.
everything. So
Yeah.
it was, yeah, of course, that's a lot of work that we had to go through to pour through it.
As a production company, the two of you, how did you break up? Who was responsible for what?
So a quick timeline is in January of 2018 or 2019, we were putting together a pitch video for our board to see about doing this. And Maria at that time then went on and continued to work on Oh My Gourd, which was a documentary that we put out right before this. And so she was doing the offline edit of that while I was just digging into the research, getting into the books, looking at all the silver, the pictures, meeting with the team from RISD Museum. And so
Yeah, I'm putting lots of timelines together, what he thought should go in which episode. But then once we got the interviews, we basically said, okay, Scott, you're doing episode 1, I'm doing episode 2. And so we put a rough cut of that simultaneously. And then I think we were each researching materials for
yeah.
each of our documentaries simultaneously. So we were kind of we're both in the same process the whole way.
Yeah.
It was only towards the end that we kind of split up and you refined it with the audio and the color correction and all that while I was tying up loose ends. But certainly the research was an enormous amount of time. Every single item of silver we showed, we had to make sure that it was the right time period, that it was related to the designer that we were perhaps talking about or the style. So, you know, we had these amazing materials at our disposal, but there was a lot of...
Was it just you two, or did you have production assistants? Anybody?
Does our son count?
So you didn't have any, like, a research assistant?
No.
You didn't.
No.
It was just the
us
two of you.
and Dewey, our cinematographer, as a core team.
Yeah.
You know, but we did the majority
Yeah.
of the research from our side, again, with RISD
Normally it
Museum's
takes a
help.
team.
Yeah.
Yes, normally it does. And I think if it weren't for COVID and if we were here in the building, we would have had more support. But because of the situation,
Right.
it was a lot.
No, I'll say the fun part of being a husband and wife team is you'll be at home on a Sunday and Maria will be cooking or something and I'll yell, "Oh, I just found this great, you know, piece of silver from 1872. And
Yeah.
come look at this." And she'll go, "Oh."
Were
Yeah,
there times you said, "Nah, that's not good enough for the documentary, the story. Like, would you discover maybe a story and get excited, and maybe Maria go, I don't know if that fits. Would you have any of those moments?
There were, we were actually talking about this earlier. There was one story that I was really fascinated by, and it was John Gorham took a battle steamer to England called the Arctic. And that ship was involved in a terrible accident off the coast of Newfoundland, and it sank.
Wow.
And the people who survived were the crew and a few passengers. All the women and children on that ship drowned.
Wow.
And it was such a terrible scandal, and it was, the crew was faulted for behaving that way, that it kind of set the precedence for how they needed to act in future, including it kind of set the precedence for the Titanic.
Wow.
They
the women
they
and
required
children first.
more lifeboats. They said women and children first, things like that. So to me, that was really fascinating. But once it was in the documentary and we were watching it, we were like, it's a bit too much of a tangent.
Right. And
So-
how did that weave into what you were,
Yeah.
your main
The core
story?
story,
Right,
yeah.
right.
So
It
you-
was like 2 years after John Gorham had taken that ship.
Yes,
so.
that it sank and all of that. So as wonderful as I thought it was of a story, it's like things like that where you go, no, we have to sacrifice certain things.
There's a very nice artistic sense that you did, and I could see the extra effort of whether it was a camera move or can you talk about post at all?
Well, Maria's the After Effects expert, so she did all the.
Not an expert, but I can
animations and
certainly
stuff.
get by, and I did the animations, and yeah, we just wanted it to have a really nice, polished, professional look. Hopefully nobody watches it and says, oh, well, this was done when resources were, tight or whatever, or
It looks
yeah.
it looks rich, as it should for the subject matter. And how long did it take you guys to do post?
Well, starting at the
Yeah.
beginning of COVID until air.
So from January 2020 to air in May, but there was a lot of B-roll being
Yeah, we were
filmed
still
at that
shooting
time
and-
as well. No interviews because I think we got all
we
our
got
interviews.
all the interviews.
But certainly B-roll and then archival images, and we worked with a lot of institutions around the country that we had to that had images that we used, and we had to clear everything
Yeah,
with
everything
them.
in clearances and-
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
one big hurdle at the time was that the Brown Hay Library was closed due to COVID,
Oh.
and that is where everything was that we needed access to.
Yeah.
And so the whole time, actually, we were shut out from there. We were lucky enough to get some students that were able to go in personally, and we would tell them, all right, take pictures. We don't know what you're going to be looking at, but this is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
They took
We had
hundreds and
ideas of
hundreds.
which boxes they
Yeah.
were in, and so look through this box and this is what we're looking for, and then they'd send us the pictures. We'd say, yes, that's it, or can you look for something that's similar, but
And their archives, they like to measure it in football fields. Do you remember how many?
they have 50 football fields worth of archives
Linear
if they laid it out. Yeah. So
Wow.
and they're not all at the library in Providence. Some of it is off-site.
Right,
so
right.
yeah.
Archive somewhere.
A lot of it,
So
yeah.
that kind of, put us back a bit waiting to get a hold of these, whether it was images or
Yeah,
other
and-
archives that we needed to have.
And it was completely understandable. All these organizations were being cautious and protecting their staff and their students, and so it was completely reasonable. But we were very lucky when they said, well, maybe this is how you can, make it work. Because if we hadn't had access, we would have been sad because we would have felt like the quality wasn't quite where we wanted it to
What
be.
about reenactments? You had some
Yeah.
reenactments in there too. How did you handle authenticity in that regard?
So early on, that was something I really wanted to do, was have some reenactments. I love, to have something with a cinema
Sure.
look to it. And a lot of times, documentaries, at least in previous years, were, they wouldn't go too much into that, or if they did, it was done maybe a little bit in a cheesy way. Now it's commonplace. I mean, you see on Netflix or HBO. I felt like I really wanted to get pieces to tell the story, to show just a glimpse, if you will, rather than having people act it out.
Right.
And then we looked around for authentic places. So before COVID, I know we're talking a lot about
That's
COVID,
okay.
but before COVID, we had talked with Blythewald Mansion
In
about
Bristol,
having
Bristol,
in
Rhode
Rhode
Island.
Island, yes.
and about having a dinner scene set up there. We were going to have a full dinner party with guests in authentic tuxedos and dresses and bringing out food and they have their own collection of Gorham silver.
Like a Victorian era dinner
Well,
party.
COVID hit and that just went out the wayside. So then we were able to find a time where we could get in a small crew, just fit the table, and we had one of our employees, Jamie McGuire, who was a producer
One of our
director here,
colleagues,
put
Yeah.
on.
A waiter.
Yep, he
Yes,
dressed
yes.
up as a
He
butler.
even named himself
Well,
Dallison.
he's named after the butler at
Oh,
Blythewald
okay,
Mansion.
there we go, Dallison.
And we filmed him setting the table. And although it's not what we had initially really hoped for, I feel like it added to a certain.
I remember
Yeah.
that. And didn't he lay down the?
The beautiful
beautiful
silverware, and
silver.
yeah.
So then we also
You
went
had to.
to,
You had to be creative.
We did, yeah.
Based on the challenges he had.
We went to
Absolutely.
Babcock Smith House in Westerly, and which is a very authentic, early 19th century home that it was actually set in the it was in the 18th century, but our part we were filming in the early 19th century, and we had a couple of actors dress up as Jabez and John,
Yes.
and
One of our colleagues again,
Mike Riley. And Ed Fazio was the
Yes.
older Jabez, which I think he did a great job with the
Yes.
mutton chops. But again, shooting it in a way where it's just not in your face, but we wanted to give a subtle
Yeah.
look
Right,
and
right.
feel
Yeah,
to
to add,
it.
it really
Yeah.
added.
Yeah.
Joy.
And then you had my friend Mauro
Mar-
Colangelo, who
Yes.
Music, yeah.
I'd worked with on the Pell documentary, and he's an exceptional talent who lived in Rhode Island. He's now moved subsequently back to Italy. But tell us about working with Mauro.
We got Mauro on board very early on. That was one thing we're like, we want a soundtrack to
A
this. We
wonderful
don't
score,
want
yeah.
to just get music
He's the real
royalty
deal.
free.
Yes,
He's the
yes,
real
yes,
deal.
yes.
So we connected
Yeah.
very early on, so early on that before we even shot a piece of film, he had been composing the music.
A
So
theme.
he came up with a lot of this. Just he
And he
said
named
played
it
out
after a lot of the flatware,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
Buttercup and the different
when he
design
sent it to
patterns.
us.
So that was fun.
But Mauro's music, I feel it just brought everything to life. His music is magical, and if you listen to it,
It brings the emotion.
Yeah, it does. It does. So many people have told us they love the soundtrack
Yeah.
to this. So
That's
that's
great.
yeah.
And I would just listen to it while I was editing. I would play it in the background, and
Yeah.
it would just inspire. Seriously, it would
Right.
inspire
No,
my
it's a-
cutting.
I remember when I was working with him, and I said, in this shot, I said, I need strings. And I didn't know how you, like I said, do you mind if I'm telling you exactly, because I love film music. And no, I like that. Different people, different things. For you guys, he created and shared.
Yeah.
Yes,
So that was-
yes.
And just such a wonderful person to
Yes.
work with.
And I just want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for your class, your professionalism. You're great people, and you make a big difference. And I know so many people who watched that documentary were blown away, frankly. And they told me, because I was so proud of the work you had done, and I
Thank you.
let you guys know.
Yes.
I hope that we can show either the full documentary in the 3 hours here on Double Feature, or if not, if you guys want to do maybe a 1-part or 2-part, we'll figure it out. But I think the audience needs an encore showing of Chasing Silver. And I want to thank you
Stephen.
for your friendship and all you do. And I want to thank everybody for joining us for this very special interview with Maria and Scott Saracen.